Hey, and welcome to another AP Daily video. This is SU Video 7, and this video will show you how to demonstrate that your work is based on credible information. Now, I want you to just stop, and before you continue watching this, I want to make sure that you watch APC Video 1 and 2 before this one. AP Video 1 and 2 is on making a complete and accurate reference works or works cited page. And it's really the first step towards demonstrating credibility. So you make sure you watch Ms. Brandt's videos on creating your reference page before watching this video. So what are we going to learn about today? Really, the main piece today is on demonstrating your credibility. And so if you're thinking about what that might mean, we want to make sure that we can trust what it is that you're saying. And you can do this by making it clear to the reader that your sources are trustworthy. And this is important because demonstrating credibility of the evidence in your essay helps to establish your own credibility. So remember, you currently are only a high school student, right? So we want to make sure that we can trust you in spite of being a high school student. And you can do that by having these very credible sources. That's what helps us trust you. And this is going to happen throughout the essay. Remember that all of your evidence in your essay must be credible. Now, I want you to take a look at these two sample reference lists. And I want you to think which set of information provides more insight on the credibility of the source. Take a look at the one on the left in the orange box, which are a set of two hyperlinks, and the one on the right, which helps give us a little bit more information on what the source is actually about. So you'll notice here on the right-hand side that the sources beyond the actual hyperlink, it's giving us a little bit of insight on two things. The first thing that it's allowing us to know is what the title of the source is. So for the Revel source, how Facebook let a friend pass my data to Cambridge Analytica, we see that the source was written in 2018, so it is a recent source. We can see the publication from New Scientist, and we also have that URL there. So in case we did want to go and read it ourselves, we have that ability to do so there. And then the Zhang, and Yang source on data preparation for data mining, we can see that that was published in an academic journal, Applied Artificial Intelligence. And so we can see that despite both of these sources, both in the left-hand and the right-hand boxes, these are the same two sources. But the box on the right-hand side is going to give the reader a lot more information as far as like what these sources are actually about and where they're coming from. So the main takeaway here is that you shouldn't depend on the URL for credibility. You have to give us a little bit more clarity on what these sources are about, and you can do that with an adequate citation here. So let's take a look at an example. So there are a couple of strategies that you can use to incorporate credibility into your writing. The first is that you can integrate the credibility of the source into the actual body of the essay. So sometimes this is going to be something looking like giving us the credentials or the education or the profession of the author that you're using. But you can also demonstrate purposeful use through developing a complete list of references that clearly demonstrate the credible origin of your ideas and evidence, and using those sources in a specific and relevant way. And you should be incorporating both of these strategies throughout this paper. So in taking a look at that, I wanted to give you an example of maybe what purposeful use might look like versus what the actual integration of credibility might look like. So I'm going to start with the purple boxes on that integration of credibility, because that might be something that you are a little bit more familiar with. So we can see we have the same source on the left-hand side in the blue box and in the purple box, but I've changed the publication, okay? So you can see that in the blue box, that publication is coming from an academic journal, this hypothetical source from the Journal of Diet and Nutrition. Whereas the purple source, it's the same source with the same author, but it's being published in the Chicago Tribune, which is a newspaper. Now for that purple box under number 2, for integration of credibility, given that this source is being published in a newspaper and not necessarily an academic journal, I'm going to want to give a little bit of credibility to who that author is. So in this case, I have Lane, a prominent reporter on high school athletics in Chicago, surveyed 314 athletes of various sports and concluded the following. Whereas for purposeful use, the publication of the source provides a little bit of more information that demonstrates the credibility of the source. So that credibility coming from the academic journal, coupled with the way that the evidence would be used in this purple box, allows us to have a little bit more credibility. It allows the reader to know that this source is credible. So one thing that I also wanted to touch on is to avoid choppiness when incorporating credibility. So sometimes students, they attempt to give us a little bit too much information, too much biographical information. And that can really get in the way of the overall flow of the paper and the overall effectiveness of the argument, because your dependence on, or your explanation of the biography of the background of the author gets in the way. So I want you to be aware of two things. First, demonstrating the credibility of the source should be secondary to the content that's coming from the source. And second, you should avoid adding excess details that distract from the overall argument or message that you're discussing. So here's an example from that same hypothetical source. So Lane surveyed 314 high school athletes on their post-practice eating habits. He concluded that a majority of the respondents did not have any caloric intake within 60 minutes of the conclusion of practice. Lane is an expert in nutrition. He received his bachelor's degree in biology from the University of Illinois and is currently a professor of nutrition and health sciences at the University of Chicago. Now, taking a look at that last part, which I currently have highlighted in yellow, what about this is most relevant to the credibility of the author? Well, really, it's the fact that he's a professor of nutrition and health sciences at the University of Chicago. That is really what's making him more credible. So we don't necessarily need to know that he's an expert in nutrition or where he received his bachelor's degree from, because we already know that he's a professor of nutrition and health sciences at the University of Chicago. So we could instead write it like this. Lane, a professor of nutrition and health sciences at the University of Chicago, surveyed 314 high school athletes on their post-practice eating habits. He concluded that most respondents did not have any caloric intake within 60 minutes of the conclusion of practice. So that right there is going to allow us to really get to know who this source is while still focusing on what the primary information is all about. Now, the second thing that I want to focus on is clarification on purposeful use. So when we think about purposeful use, I want you to know that you don't necessarily need to explicitly address the credibility of all of your sources. In fact, sometimes it's going to be way too difficult for you to discuss the individual credibility of a source that has 10 authors, for example. That's really going to eat into your word count. So when we talk about purposeful use, this is when we ask you for the citation to clearly demonstrate the credibility of the source, and for you to use the source in a particularly relevant way. That's what purposeful use is. And in an AP seminar, credibility is not necessarily referring to how well known a source is. You must ensure that the author of the source is an expert in the field. If it's in doubt from the citation, that's when you should be incorporating that credibility into your paper. So I have an example here of what is considered an ineffective demonstration of purposeful use. So I have my source here, my Hekela, Nyberg, and Norden source. And the title again is Long Working Hours and Cancer Risk, a multi-cohort study. And we can see here that this citation is coming from docsci.com. Now, we don't know what docsci.com necessarily is, so we don't know what the credibility of this source is going to be just by looking at it. So instead of using this citation here, we should be looking for a complete citation. So it's unclear where this source is coming from, which is going to lead to questionable credibility. So instead of providing us with the actual URL of where it's coming from, you should be looking to have a complete citation. And that complete citation is going to give us a lot more insight as far as what the credibility of the source is. So instead of looking at the URL where they found the source, you should be looking at some of the other information found on the source that can help provide us a little bit of insight into how credible the source is. So in reality, this source was originally published in the British Journal of Cancer, which makes this a highly credible source. But in addition to that, remember that you also have to focus on that purposeful use. So you have to use the source in a purposeful way. So in a study evaluating the long-term impacts of working hours and health, Hikila et al. Concluded that there was a significant reduction in cancer rates associated with working fewer hours per week. Thus, an argument can be made for capping the number of hours that companies should mandate from their workers. This source is being used in a way that is relevant to that argument. So for purposeful use, intentional use of substantive and relevant evidence from the source, plus a citation that provides specific information on the origin of the credibility of the source equals purposeful use. So once again, the importance of demonstrating credibility is critical for your success in AP Seminar, and selecting evidence from credible sources and clearly communicating to that reader through attribution matters. Remember, if I can't tell where your information is coming from, why should I believe it? Thanks for watching.